From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. It's Andre Johnson.
Junior.
Don't forget Junior. It's very important to remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, to share, to rate, to review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification. But when we drop that fire content, and also hello to the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Glad you have found us here wherever you may be along the Gulf Coast. So welcome to the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. All right. Speaking of fire content, we got another one today on this episode of the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. It is Wednesday in the city of New Orleans. Hump Day. Interesting week, no doubt about that. The transition week, if you will. Still some free agent stuff, but also you can kind of feel the wheel turning towards the draft, and we'll slowly but surely get to that as well. But today, we're going to tackle a different topic. But first and foremost, how are you feeling today, Andre?
I'm feeling good. You know, like you kind of touched on, it's kind of that part of free agency where you're looking around and you're like waiting for your team to do a little something because you're like, there's still a few moves out there to be done. Yeah. The Saints really staying quiet, but something also that they've been doing quietly is building up that cap space. You know, I remember not too long ago, Sean, we were sitting in here and the Saints had to clear almost $50 million in cap just to get cap compliant. A couple weeks later, not only are they cap compliant, they're almost $32 million over the cap.
That is really something, isn't it? I mean, you can look at it a lot of different ways, but the bottom line is, as you said, they have $32 million or around $30+ million under the salary cap, whatever the case may be. I saw 27. You saw 31 point. What is it?
31.8 according to Spotrac.
I saw their projections at 30 million. So you know what the numbers at. So of course, that's what we had to go with the big picture here today.
Of course, because now the question, once you get money, obviously, how do you spend it? So now that the Saints have a little room under that salary cap, what should they do with it?
Well, what an interesting predicament they find themselves in here. And it's funny, this question, I was on the radio yesterday at about 4:30, the Eric Asher Inside New Orleans show. I do a lot of, you probably heard if you're around the city, I do a lot of radio hits, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, wherever. And Eric, it's just you get so into like what's happening, and he kind of caught me off guard with the question. He goes, what should the Saints do with the additional cap space? So I had to kind of rattle things off on top of my head because I just hadn't gotten there yet, just in terms of what do they do with this cap space. But I really, ever since I got off the phone with him, I've been thinking about it ever since, just at least in a work capacity. And then it kind of caught fire today on social media with a couple of reporters tweeting out caps calculations for the New Orleans Saints. And it's funny because, remember we said. And there was the big deal given where they were in the salary cap situation, and the Derek Carr was the huge move where if they were to cut Derek Carr and take the huge dead money hit, or even what they did post June 1st, it would have required just an absolute ton of restructures to get cap compliant. But if they restructured Derek Carr, it would only require a couple of moves outside of the Derek Carr restructure with a couple other restructures. Well, when you really look at it, they actually kind of combined the two. They restructured Derek Carr, but also kept restructuring other players way more than I had originally anticipated, way more than to just get cap compliant. They've gotten themselves way into in the red is over and the black is profit. Is that correct? I think that's how it goes. Yeah. So they restructured Derek Carr, and I just my own math that I check pretty much every day. I accounted for 4 additional restructures that they really didn't necessarily have to do, and that was with a reasonable amount of cap space, which brings us to today. Now they sit here at $30+ million in cap space from that near $50 million figure. That's an $80 million swing in their cap situation. So first things first, this is not meant to be a criticism or a praise, but the one thing we are not going to do on this podcast is what we have all been guilty of in years past. I know I have in years past, but it was easy to do that when they were winning, is we're not going to throw the rose petals. We're not going to throw the bouquets at Mickey and Kai. They did it again. No one said they could do it. They got out of cap hell. Blah, blah, blah. They are the only team in the NFL that operates this way. It's not magic. It's simply an approach, and it's an approach that, frankly, they alone take to this extreme. It really is what it is. That's not a praise. That's not a knock. It's just we're just going to treat it as they always do. This is just the way they do business. The goal is not cap magic, and it's not to be great accountants. The goal is to win games. And the harsh truth of the matter is they have not won nearly enough in a very, very, very long time. But this latest round of moves does certainly make me curious, a guy that's very into the salary cap, a guy that's kind of like by happenstance become a little bit of a salary cap like you guys ask me about the salary cap all the time just because I didn't intend to become a kind of a salary cap reporter, but I guess you almost have to when you work covering the Saints. You kind of almost become a salary cap guy just on your own. But it was reported the Saints, as you mentioned, $32 million in cap space. Remember, they would need, this is a ballpark estimation, I could be a little off, they would probably need to save an estimated $7 million or so in cap space to sign that draft class, depending on how big that draft class ultimately ends up being. So even with that, that's still a lot of space, especially when you consider it's a lot of space and they really don't have a whole lot of big-name, high-price guys available. A lot of the high-price guys are gone. They're not completely off the table, but the big money guys that we saw originally have all kind of flown off. So what is exactly the Saints' play here? What are the Saints thinking? Well, there are several options. The straight line option, Andre, as we talked about, is they're creating all this cap space. They're getting $30 million under because they have their eyes on a few prospects that may require a higher amount of cap space to get the deal done. Not a huge amount, but they're giving themselves options. I mean, they did want to sign, Charvarius Ward. They were in the mix for Cooper Kupp, guys that probably would have required a decent amount of cap space. So who could that be with what is left? I mean, Keenan Allen, Asante Samuel Jr., Stephon Diggs, Dalton Reisner. Would those names all qualify? Maybe. Side note, I got to tell you, if somehow the Saints came away with both Keenan Allen and Asante Samuel Jr. in this free agent class, I might be tempted, might be tempted to get a little more optimistic about this team this year, because that's two players that's two names now. So that's two names that who knows? We'll see. Let's not go too high. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. The other scenario is maybe they are gearing up for a trade with a player for a higher cap number, and for a trade to work, they would have to have enough real space on hand. So who would fit that bill? I came up with two names: Trey Hendrickson.
That's the first one. Yep.
And Dallas Goedert. I know he's up for, I don't know if he's officially on the trade block or they gave him permission to seek a trade, but those are the two names that I came up with. Scenario 3, kind of a combination of all those things and possibly getting out in front of an extension on their own roster. They don't really have a whole lot of extension candidates. The names I thought of, Rashid Shaheed, maybe. Alontae Taylor might be the biggest one in my opinion, just because he's done a lot. I think he's outplayed his original contract. We had a whole podcast on Chris Olave. Yeah. It seems a little unlikely to get that far out in front of Chris Olave. So I guess that's certainly an option. And then scenario number 4 will be something they really haven't done, and it would signal a major shift in salary cap strategy. And to me, it's the most intriguing. That is to say, if you're the Saints, they say, you know what? Let's build up some cap space now, so we can carry it over to next year and use that cap space to offset some of the huge hits that will inevitably be coming our way, especially if we got to get Derek Carr off of our books, because the 2 prior restructures, the dead money hit when he finally comes off, June 1st or not June 1st, is going to be huge. I got to be honest. Of all those options, I like Keenan Allen, I like Asante Samuel Jr., but of all those options, the last one is the most intriguing to me. It really is the most intriguing to me, because history tells us that this is likely not the way they're going to go. They usually stay at or right by the salary cap line. But if there was ever a time to tweak that approach, to have a new way of thinking, to have a new outlook with fresh ideas and fresh momentum, it would be now, right? New coach, new coaching staff, aging roster, which is a big one. So I don't know what the Saints are going to do. But those are some scenarios that they could be preparing for. And I'm very, very, very intrigued to see what's going to happen here, because you don't carve out all this space for nothing, just for your health, just to, just show Mrs. Benson you're doing something. I mean, you got to do it for some reason. So very curious to see what that move ultimately ends up being.
4 options you named. Number 1 was, continue to sign guys in the free agency, because they do still have some talented guys out there. Number 2, maybe they're gearing up for a trade. And I will say, if you can get a Trey Hendrickson, if you can get a Dallas Goedert, that makes your team exponentially better. If you can do that, do it. It's good to have the space to make it possible. I think that's probably the least likely of the 4, but who knows? You mentioned that, kind of a combination of the 2 for number 3. I like number 4 the best. Yeah. Number 4 is the one that I think they're actually going, because when you look at this free agency so far that the Saints have had, they missed on Charvarius Ward. They missed on Cooper Kupp. You missed on some D linemen. You haven't signed a quarterback. You haven't signed a running back other than Velus Jones Jr. You haven't made that big signing at wide receiver so far. No big signing at corner so far outside of Isaac Yiadom is probably the biggest one. So you've still got a lot of needs that you haven't necessarily addressed in free agency, partially because you've missed out on guys that maybe you wanted. So instead of looking to the future, let's take a look into the past. After the 2020 season, the Saints were nearly $100 million over the cap. They had to clear all that. After 2021, about $75 million over the cap. After 22, about $55 million over the cap. After 23, they were in that $80 million, $75 million range. And we know after this past season, they were just under $50 million, closer to that $45 to $47 million over the cap. All of that, 5 years in a row, they have to clear just to get started with free agency. And I've said it a few times on this podcast before, I'm looking forward and looking ahead to a future where you don't have to do all that to start in the free agency.
Yes.
Where you could start in the green, where you can start under the cap. And that's what I think the Saints should build towards right now. Just because you have $31 million doesn't mean that you have to spend $31 million. Obviously, you're going to use a little bit to sign your draft class and all of that, but you can sit on that and build towards the future, because when Kellen Moore first came here, a lot of people's first question is, why would arguably the best coach out there, young, fresh offensive coordinator with a guy who's just coming off a Super Bowl, want to come to what was viewed as the worst job in the NFL? They had to convince Kellen Moore to come here, and maybe part of that pitch was, hey, the way we've done things so far, where we have kicked the can down the road, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to get to a point where you can actually be aggressive in free agency, and you can use, this salary cap to improve your roster and improve your offense. So I think that 4th option that you named of starting to build up some salary cap, so that instead of having to clear 100, 75, 55, 80, 47 million to start free agency, maybe you start free agency under the cap. And
That'd
you
be
can
nice.
Create more room from there, especially when you look ahead to the 2026 free agent class. It's stacked at the running back position. Obviously, a guy like Derrick Henry is going to be older. You probably don't want a guy like that since you've got a guy like Alvin Kamara who's already older, but Kyron Williams could be a free agent next year. Travis Etienne could be a free agent next year. You look at receiver, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton. Tight end, Dallas Goedert could be a free agent next year. Trey McBride, who's killing it in Arizona right now, could be a free agent next year. You could look at all the big dominoes for the most part in this year's free agency, they've fallen. But if you've got a lot of cap space heading into next year, heading into what's expected to be a really good draft, heading into what's going to be a really good free agency, especially at the positions that the Saints are weak at, I think the best thing for the Saints to do right now is stand pat, sit on your $31 million. Just because you got the check doesn't mean you need to spend it, and build for the future. That's what a rebuild is. That's what the Saints really haven't had to do since I've been alive, because even back in 05, 06, it's hard to call that a rebuild because it happened so quick.
Yeah, that's not a bad option. It really isn't, and it would signal a acknowledgement, even though they will never come out and say it, an acknowledgement and a reboot, a reshuffling of the deck, a rethinking of the salary cap approach, because they have stretched the stretch the rubber band as far as it's going to go until it's going to pop. Maybe it's time to, kind of reset the ledger a little bit, start from zero, and then giving yourself enough salary cap space to start an offseason as opposed to having to go in and constantly undo and redo and extend and restructure. And when you're doing all that, you're saying goodbye to some good players. I mean, we saw Zach Bond from a season ago. We saw Caden Ellis from a couple seasons ago. We saw C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who I know who they traded. That wasn't necessarily the same thing as free agency. We saw Paulson Adebo. I mean, look, they still have a massive need at cornerback right now. I saw Willie Gay sign with the Dolphins today. Who else have they lost? I know Peyton Turner. I'm not even going to go there with that one.
Yeah.
There was another player at the tip of my... Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Right now, they still need a veteran receiver. We understand that. So maybe it is an acknowledgement. I don't know. I do know this. It's at 31 or 30, whatever it is right now. I would imagine the Saints are going to probably add, whether it's a higher name free agent like a Samuel or a Keenan Allen, or if it's more of a middle tier to lower tier contract free agent. I still think they're going to add a couple of more players just because there's still some holes in the roster. Even if you don't have a guaranteed starter, you would add some depth pieces there. But the one thing, plus you have to sign your draft class. So it's not going to finish at 31. It'll probably end somewhere around 20, 22, maybe 18, somewhere in that range, depending on who you're able to sign. Because remember, when they go out and sign a free agent, especially a big name one, usually that first year, the salary cap hit is very, very, very low. But the one thing that they didn't do that still I'm scratching my head over, like for instance, and maybe this is we're talking about a veteran free agent, a veteran wide receiver. Maybe Kellen Moore views Cedric Wilson as that guy because he adjusted his contract when he didn't have to. I thought for sure he would have gotten cut. They restructured Colin Saunders. They restructured Nathan Shepard. They restructured Demario Davis. They restructured Pete Werner. You can make a case for each one of those individually, but as a group, I know mathematically you didn't have to do all those guys. So right. It's an interesting play that they're making because they are creating a lot of space, and generally when they create a lot of space, it's to make a big move. But if the big move is to not make a move, in most cases it would be kind of boring. But in this case, I would actually applaud it because it would show a little bit of fiscal sanity and a little bit of a change in the way they're doing things that I think, look, at one point their approach was working. And now maybe it's acknowledgement that, hey, we got to change our approach. Maybe not this exact offseason, but maybe we get ready for next offseason. I have no problem if that was the way they ultimately want to go.
Right. I mean, like you said, this worked in 2017, 2018, 2019 when that championship window was still open, when you were still in the playoffs and when you were still competing for a Super Bowl, when you still have Drew Brees on the roster who gives you a chance to win it all every single year. It was working. But in this iteration of the New Orleans Saints, where you've got an old, aging roster, where you don't have playmakers, where you've got a young, creative mind at head coach that doesn't necessarily have the roster to be young and creative, now you've got to switch things up. And I would applaud the Saints if this is what they're doing and going in a different direction, because I've always found it difficult to believe that Kellen Moore would want to come here and keep doing the same things that got the previous coach fired.
It would be a change, and they are so set in their ways, the way they do things. That's a hard habit to break. And you see a lot of that space sitting there. It's like when you see your bank account, I shouldn't go out this weekend, but maybe, let's have, no.
That's what I'm saying. When you get that payday check, it's very tempting to say,
it's so easy to say, I got to save it.
Hit the group message, we going out tonight. Yeah. But, hey, if you save it for next weekend, you might be able to do something a little more fun.
See, I mean, it would take some discipline as well. So we'll see how it goes. It's. I don't ever recall. Like I've always they do this every year. You rattled off the numbers, and it was a really good job of going down the research there because I didn't realize they were at 100 one year. But I think that was the dip.
Was the COVID year.
That was the dip after COVID, dropped. Where a lot of guys were borrowing from the future and all that stuff. So you did a good job of that. It would be fantastic if for just once you went to an off season and you didn't have to worry about restructuring 10 guys. But they've never done it to where I'm going to restructure. I'm going to get cap compliant. And usually it's a kind of a one-for-one pay-as-you-go. Okay, I'm going to sign him. All right, need caps. Okay, I'll cut this player off. Then I'll restructure these players. They've been carving out all this space over the last week or so, and they really haven't offset that with any signings. So I don't recall them ever doing that to this magnitude. I'd have to really go back and look because each offseason is kind of its own story. But if it is a change, which I don't know. I don't know if I want to go there yet because I know how they are. Yep. But if that is the change, that would be a welcome change. And then obviously the other piece of the equation is, and we're going to get into this really next week more than anything because we're really going to shift to draft start next week. Mm-hmm. You gotta start hitting on these young guys, man, on these young studs. You have to start. I mean, who was the last top 10 player they've drafted at a position?
Michael Thomas.
I would say, well, no. I mean, the last one would probably be Eric McCoy, 2019. Yeah, top 10 player at his position. We're gonna get into that as the weeks go by, but I think ultimately that's the other pieces of the equation. So. We'll figure it out how it goes. As we sit here right now, though, I was asked about this on the radio. Where do you think right now this team is tangibly better, and where do you think they are tangibly worst? I'll go better first, if you don't mind.
Right.
I think this team is going to be better in two areas next year. I think by sheer law of averages and just sheer no one can be this unlucky, they're going to be healthier. Okay, they're going to be healthier. And look, that's not to say they're going to be healthy. They're just going to be healthier. I mean, that was a lot of injuries last year. So I think they're going to be healthier, which I think can have a tangible effect on wins and losses. And the other area outside of the X factor of health that I think they're going to be better, I think they're going to be better against the run defense. I think you brought in a guy like Justin Reed. That's his calling card. What do you say? If you come in the hallway with me, you got to pay the toll, something like that. I mean, look, that was a great line that he used. You brought in Devin Godshaw, who is there to do the dirty work, who embraces the dirty work, and especially with this new scheme fit. You brought back Nathan Shepard, who's the better run stuffer between he and Colin Saunders. You brought back Colin Saunders as well. So I think they're going to be better at run defense. And I think they have no choice but to be healthier next year. So if you're looking for any glimmer of hope, any glimmer of optimism right now as we sit here right here on this Wednesday, what day is today? March 20th, March 19th? That's where I think they might be better or will be better.
I'm going to go with the trenches. Similar to the reasons you picked on the offensive line, that was the most injured unit on the team last year. They are going to be healthier, so I would hope that they would be able to get their starters out on the field a little more. Plus, you've got Taliese Fuaga, who went through a pretty good rookie year. He took his lumps at times, but he got better from day one to the end of the season. You've got Taliese Fuaga coming back. You've got Trevor Penning, who was about to get that bus label plastered on him. He's coming off the best year of his career. Trevor Penning's coming back. Eric McCoy's there. Cesar Ruiz is there. Outside of that left guard position, which you could still shuffle a few guys in there, you've got a lot of stability on that offensive line right now. And then on the defensive line, you bring back Chase Young. You've got Cam Jordan still there, depending on the role. You mentioned all the defensive tackles. And
a lot of D tackles.
A lot of D tackles. Yeah. And you've got Brian Brzee, who really, to me, if there's anybody who took the biggest leap last year, it was Brian Brzee. And I'm excited to see what leap he'll take heading into year 3. So I think you got better in the trenches on the offensive line and the defensive line.
I think that's fair. And I think they're obviously better at the safety position. Although I do like Jordan Howland's got to take a step next year. Jordan Howland's got to take a step. I don't know, what was he, a 5th round pick? He's got to take a step forward next year. Because I think his rookie year they were high hopes for him, but last year he kind of got lost a little bit. And there was certainly some moments where he did not look like he took the proper leap that they had certainly wanted him to be there. But there's still a lot of areas where I don't know if they're any better. Like, I still don't know how good the secondary is going to be. I mean, I love the safety group, but I mean, you got to. I need to see a corner here, guys. I need to see a legitimate corner because DA loved his DBs. It's that simple. And DA was gonna if one thing's gonna be good on his team, it's gonna be the secondary. He's a natural DB coach, secondary coach by nature, regardless if he was a DC or head coach. And you could say about the way that team was built, he always had some quality DBs. He always had some guys, and the scheme certainly helped those guys as well. So I'm not sure where they're gonna be in the secondary. And then Do they have enough playmakers? Well, we're going to keep saying this
until they actually
add playmakers. I'm not talking about guys who could potentially be playmakers. Guys that when you sign them, you have PM, playmaker, next to their name. That's why I know he's a little old. If you brought in Keenan Allen, I would have absolutely no problem with it whatsoever, despite the fact that he's 32 years old. And he had what did he do last year? He didn't do. It was a kind of a scatterbrain year last year.
Rookie. A lot was going on. They had a lot of receivers out there.
So, I think they addressed the playmaker position when it comes to the draft, and we'll see. Maybe the veteran wide receiver thing is something that they feel like they already have in house with Cedric Wilson. I don't know, but I just think ultimately this is a little bit of an uneven roster. It's not complete yet, and I think they're going to be. We've had this question a lot too. I think they're going to be better in 2025, but I don't think they're going to be good, at least is the way it's set up right now. Somebody asked me on the radio, 5.5 over and under, if I gave you that, would you say? I said over, slightly. I would probably go 7 and 10. I just think, because I think I think some of the things that were bad last year, they could be better at, but 7 and 10 ain't nearly good enough for this fan base.
I might take the under because I don't think they've gotten enough better at the positions that matter. Their quarterback position's still the same. Their corners are weak. We talked about the lack of playmakers at wide receiver, and looking at the response to the last podcast, I was kind of surprised. I thought people would kind of push back against us saying Chris Olave isn't necessarily a wide receiver one, but a lot of people kind of took that approach saying they need to see more from Chris Olave.
Of course, he's the top end too. That's why the extension thing. I don't know that he would be the guy they would look at right now. I'd have to see more. And honestly,
time's ticking when it comes to him.
I need him to take that leap into number one category. If you're going to be a top end 2, that's fine, but you're going to get top end 2 money. So, anyway, all right, we only got a few seconds left here. What do you think about covering hockey?
Man, I am excited. I went to one NHL game when I was covering sports in Ohio. It was one of the most fun things I've ever done.
Yeah, they say it's a great experience up close and personal. So in case you haven't known, there's some speculation out there. Governor Landry, Steve Scalise talking about NHL expansion in New Orleans. I'll believe when I see it, but I love the ambition. For Andre Johnson Jr., I'm Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.